Ahoy, everyone. This is David Perry with my continuing series of interviews in the Zoom room, I call it online TV, with friends, colleagues, artists, and writers talking about how they're getting from the great pause of this year of COVID into the great return. And I'm very, very happy to be in the Zoom room with two of my favorite people, longtime colleague Marilyn Bancel, and also someone who has had, well, probably more hours on the aisle than a frequent flyer. Longtime Chronicle journalist and reviewer, and now author of his new book, The Little Man, Bernie Weiner. Bernie, Marilyn, welcome.
Hi, ahoy.
Thank you.
Ahoy.
You, David.
So, Bernie, I think that you have the record for being on my press list the longest. When I started my PR business in San Francisco, I did a lot of theater representation, worked for San Francisco Opera, and of course, our shows and our bosses all lived and died by when we opened the Chronicle, were we going to see the little man standing on his chair? How did that whole idea come up, and was it yours?
No, it goes back to the 1930s, I'm told. They wanted some kind of branding image to alert readers to good movies and good theater and so on. So it's been very popular with the editors and with the newspaper, not popular at all with the critics.
Or PR people.
Or PR people, yeah. Unless you get the little man clapping out of his chair.
Yes, absolutely. That was the gold standard. You know, Jan Wall had 5 hats and Bernie Weiner had the little man standing on his chair clapping. Over the years, how many people wrote you back complaining about the little man not being seated as they would have liked it?
I'd say about 90% of theater people, artistic directors, were incensed until they got the little man falling out of his chair, and then they were happy.
So talk to us about your career. When did you start as a writer, and when did you start here in the Bay Area?
I've been writing since I was about 12, I guess. Poetry and plays and short stories and that kind of thing. I came to the Chronicle in 1971. Wait a minute, is that right? Yeah, 91, yeah. And then Payne Knickerbocker suddenly resigned. He was the arts critic, the film and drama critic. And it happened very fast. And the Chronicle had hired me to be a sort of backup utility infielder in case somebody went out. And so when Nick left, they just moved me over into reviewing, and it was a long 16-year stretch from there. I only expected to be there for a couple of years because I had my own work I was doing in theater. But the quality and quantity of the work that was out there was so intensely wonderful that I just couldn't bring myself to leave until I started to get burnt out really quick. So it was fun. It's fun. Debilitating, but fun.
Yeah, Marilyn, when did you come to know Bernie, and what is your impression of his importance to the Bay Area cultural scene?
Oh, those are two big questions. I want to start by saying that there's one person who can't be here today who absolutely should, and that is Rella Lossie, who was the theater editor for the Performing Arts newspaper. I started and turned into a nonprofit, which ran from the East Bay Review of the Performing Arts, ran from 1976 to 79. And I got to know Bernie in that time span through Rella. Bernie, you remember Rella, of course.
Of course, dear friend. Sorry she's not here.
Yeah, we lost her to breast cancer many years ago. But she joined your Theater Drama Circle Awards Committee. And she was part of our East Bay cabal, if I may use the term, to help you out because there was so much amazing theater and new work being done in the Bay Area in those years. It was more than the Chronicle could cover. So we thought we would give you a hand, so to speak.
Well, I appreciated it. I needed it.
Well, the review only published every other week. That was all we could manage on a very tiny advertising budget. But I can't imagine how hard it was on you to just be out there all the time, trying to take it all in. And so much of that is in your wonderful memoir, Little Man Clapping, which is what I'm here to, support you with and hope people will be able to get copies from you and read, because it is really a wonderful book about your life and how you came into this amazing theater scene that was here in the 1970s.
And we talk about San Francisco as a hotbed of theater during those years. I remember in college studying the performances of ACT and seeing Mark Singer in that amazing production of Shakespeare that just became iconic. Now we're in a year when there's no theater going on in theaters, but I know performing arts companies are looking for ways to keep on keeping on. Bernie, what do you think the theater community is going to do when finally this pall of COVID lifts? What type of theater are our companies going to produce?
I wish I had a clue. They don't have a clue either yet. And it's possible that this will be back to normal quicker than we think. But if we're not, it's going to be, they're having a devil of a time because of economics mainly. How do you keep afloat when you can't bring money in and bring crowds in and the audience in and so on? So, but we have so many creative artists and creative theater people around that I'm hopeful that they'll come up with a plan, some way of doing theater in a different way, or doing a different kind of theater in a different way. I think it'll happen, but it's going to be a terribly trying time for us all for a great many reasons.
Marilyn, what's your take on what is it going to take to get our theater artists back on stage? And how do you think COVID will impact just not only the quality, but the quantity of theater we see in the Bay Area?
My career after the East Bay Review was as a fundraiser. Nonprofits taught me how to go after grants and individuals to match what could be earned income. And the mix between earned income and contributed income in the arts is, as you know, somewhere between the 60%, 40% range. So earned income is really critical on the box office, and how to handle all of that is amazing. But in the event of an emergency, individuals can help by stepping up. Grant support can help by stepping up. I happened to be at the Exploratorium during the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, and after the effect of that disaster on the earned income at the Exploratorium, I was able to raise a significant amount of money to help. Now, when an entire sector is affected, it means truly stepping up and doing something on an extraordinary basis. Our family has tried to turn our stimulus checks over to arts organizations who are important to us. And there's no way around, however, how much of a toll it's going to take. Maybe we'll see more street theater. Street theater, political theater was pretty big in the 70s, but remember that. But it's hard to make a living by putting out a hat. I think the impact is going to be quite severe. I don't think there's any way around it, and the sector is going to have to rebuild gradually. But any help that can be given through anybody's pockets is going to make a difference.
Right. And
Bernie, when did you start writing this book, or in a sense, have you been writing it your entire career?
I think I was 58 when I started, and it was mainly because I wanted a record for my boys to be able to say, this is my dad. I didn't know that. that he did this. And so I started writing for them, really, and it just kept going on and on. And finally, it felt like a book. The book was ready to be born, so it became a book.
Of all the theater that you've reviewed over the many years of The Little Man Clapping, now that these people, of course, are not going to write you tomorrow because you won't have them in the paper to criticize, what was the absolute worst play you ever reviewed and the best?
Well, the worst is, I should say, preface this by saying that one of my favorite authors is Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot and Endgame and so on. And one time I was reviewing a show at Theater Artaud, I think, an all-female version of Waiting for Godot. And I mentioned that because they highlighted that. They were quite proud of that. It didn't make any difference to me, whether it was women or men. But it was execrable. It was awful. And it was like watching your best friend get murdered. And so I rarely left the theater early, left the play early. But this time I just had to, for mental health, if nothing else. I needed to get out of there. So I got up and surreptitiously made my way to the door. My hand was on the door handle. Just as they delivered the line was, "Oh, don't go. I hope I'm not boring you." And I broke out laughing and left the theater.
And I'm sure that made it into your review.
Oh yeah, I always mention when those rare cases when I had to leave. Best is harder because there was so much good stuff. I'd say, well, let me just say that there's a bunch of reviews in the book that I have collected printed on pink paper. That has about a dozen really fine reviews. One of them was a non-theater piece. It was Torvald and Dean, the ice skate dancers, ice skating champions, who just knocked me out. To this day, I almost tear up every time I think about the perfection that they exhibited on the ice. So there wasn't one. I can't pick one, but there were so many.
Marilyn, what do you think is Bernie's significance in the theater scene in San Francisco? I mean, for a long time, if Bernie Weiner wasn't there to review your show or your opening or your event, well, it just wasn't getting covered. I mean, he was the king.
From my perspective, it was the quantity of really innovative new work that was happening that Bernie really was able to bring to prominence. So many people just weren't getting noticed, and it was just a ferment of creative activity, and it was all below the radar until Bernie came on the scene and so when things really of significance were happening, Bernie was able to find it and bring it to light and give it a very broad audience and a lot of interest. And there was then the advent of the Theater Critics Awards. And Bernie, you're going to have to remind me how this worked, because my memory is pretty frail in this area. But the kinds of people that were all initially on the fringes got visibility through that. And so when did that really get organized, and how did that work in relation to the work that was being done in the Bay Area?
I'd say in the mid-'70s, we founded the Bay Area Theater Critics Circle in, I think, 77 or so. And so late 70s, early 80s was that period. And you're quite right, there was so much good stuff going on that my wife was worried for me because I was overworking. I actually got called into the publisher's office one time because I had so much overtime in my check that he had to figure out whether I should keep doing it or cut back.
Bernie, I'm sorry, Marilyn, go ahead.
Well, it's worth mentioning, I think, naming, calling out some of who those really interesting groups were that were doing some.
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time in the book doing exactly that. And I mentioned two in particular, or about five in particular, but certainly the two I mentioned most of, George Coates' Performance Works and Chris Hardman's and Snake and Antenna Theater. I thought those were two young, daring, crazy, wonderful geniuses of the theater who enlarged the possibilities of the way we can experience and see theater, so that without them breaking through a lot of the barriers and taking big risks, even when they failed, they took big risks and it paid off. Yeah, I'd say those two. Eureka Theater was another one. Mime Troupe, San Francisco Mime Troupe, who hadn't been covered in decades by the Chronicle. I couldn't believe it when I got there. But part of that was Nick Knickerbocker, Payne Knickerbocker, who was at the very last of his career, was beset by terrible arthritis in his hips, and he couldn't go to the smaller theaters because they were uncomfortable for him to make his way downstairs and up in attics and garrets and whatnot. So the Chronicle just wasn't covering a lot of what should have been covered, and I vowed to make sure that wouldn't happen again, but at a high cost to my own health and sanity, trying to be out every night.
Bernie, in our last few minutes, talk to me about what is it that makes a good reviewer, a good critic?
Well, aside from a good writing style, which I sometimes had, not always, it's the curiosity. It's the same thing that makes a good person or a good writer or a good painter or whatever. It's the curiosity to find out what's on the other side of that door. If you walk through it, what'll happen to you? And going without expectations, to be startled is a wonderful thing, and to be lost in somebody else's world is a wonderful thing. And so what I compared it to the dangers compared to being out on a tightrope, 50 feet up in the air in a circus, and somebody's greased the tightrope. You have to walk from one end to the other, trying to explain what the show was to people who don't know what the Mime Troupe was or what George Coates was up to, or Chris Hardman, or Lara Faribault. And I'd say curiosity and the ability to want to communicate with people.
Marilyn, where can people get the book?
At the moment, one should appeal directly to Bernie. And I think perhaps his email, Bernie, you are the person who is shopping this book foremost right now. Could you tell us?
Right. I spent so much time writing the damn book that I gave no thought to marketing it because it wasn't quite in my purview. But when I started to think about marketing the book, the coronavirus exploded. And that was the end of that for about 6 months. I'm just starting to get back to thinking about the book again, get it, into the bookstores and so on. Right now, I share it with friends and colleagues, and people write me and ask if I can send them a book.
Well, hopefully this interview will help that. It's funny. I am also in the same position marketing a novel during COVID. And I do know, because my publishers told me, that people are reading more than ever, that there are stats that show that people are buying books online. They're looking for things to read that reinforce their interest. So I'm going to make sure that the theater community in the Bay Area and beyond sees this interview so they can
get a copy. Good luck with you too.
Yeah, get a copy of Little Man Clapping. Marilyn, any closing thoughts? And then I'm going to give the last word to Bernie.
Oh, go straight to Bernie, please.
Bernie, any closing thought, words of wisdom?
Well, I have to say how wonderful it is to see Marilyn again and to work with her in a way. She was a great, great resource and that her newspaper journal was a wonderful, and it matched in quality the work that we were seeing on stage. So hip hip hooray.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Marilyn Bancel and Bernie Weiner. The book is Little Man Clapping. Marilyn, hold it up for us one more time. And we are going to make sure that everyone who loves theater and everyone who loved the little man, and probably some of the people who wanted to stick a dagger through the little man, I saw that cartoon once, get a copy of this book. Because if you want to understand the importance of theater in the San Francisco Bay Area, you need to read Little Man Clapping by Bernie Weiner. Marilyn, Bernie, this is David Perry. Ahoy.
Ahoy.
Thanks, David.